Okay. Welcome to the vaccination station. My name is Dave, and today I am speaking with Lydia. Lydia, nice to have you
Hi,
here.
thank you for having me.
Lydia, let's start by getting to know you. Can you tell me 3 things about yourself that you think the audience would find interesting?
I used to work as a quality control chemist before I became a mom. I did quality control for a pharmaceutical plant and used to work for the quote unquote enemy. So that's kind of interesting. I live in a pretty isolated community in Canada. It's surrounded by mountains and wilderness, and I have deer walk through my yard every day. And yeah, it's not anything like regular like America, like how people picture even just a major Canadian city or whatever. It's quite a different way of living. I grew up in the city, but I prefer it out here. Third thing, I'm in nursing school. That's kind of interesting. Yeah, I just started this January, and I know it's going to take me a while because I've got 3 kids, but I hope to become a public health nurse and maybe even a nurse practitioner someday. So, yeah.
That's really terrific. Thanks, Lydia. In fact, you've prompted a few questions there. Firstly, what did you do as a quality control person in the chemical /
The
pharmaceutical
plant
industry?
I worked at made bulk drugs for so we'd make the drug that would be shipped to another plant that would, blend them with their whatever they mix pills with and then stamp them into pills. Like we made like the actual active ingredients for quite a few drugs. And as a quality control chemist, I had to analyze the starting material for purity and any contaminants like heavy metals. Then I had to do reaction monitoring to make sure like reactions were proceeding in the right direction, because sometimes side reactions occur and then that contaminates your final product. So you want to kind of watch for that. And then the final product I had to test for purity. So yeah, and then even right down to like when they would clean out the vessels, like they would bring swabs, like the plant operators would bring a swab that they swab the vessel with after cleaning. And I'd have to like test those swabs to see if there was any product in them. So just to determine like for the next batch, if it was clean, right? So every step in a pharmaceutical manufacturing process is like heavily monitored. Yeah.
And what testing methods did you use? I mean, and what's the physical process? I mean, no one imagines that you stand there next to a conveyor belt, poking at pills and sniffing them to check
No,
that they look
like
okay.
HPLC and gas chromatography was the main 2, but we also did like, wet chemistry, like with like colored reagents and stuff like that as well. And yeah, but mostly like chromatography, some NMR as well.
The place where you live sounds just wonderful. I'm an introvert, so it would be
It
perfect for me.
it's
Absolutely.
so isolating. I love it. Yeah. Um, the nearest city is a 2-hour drive, and it's not even a big city. It's like pretty small compared to like the next biggest city, which is 4 hours away. And then my town itself has about 3,000 people in it. So
Do you ever see moose around where you live?
yeah, sometimes, but it's mostly deer and elk. But like my husband goes hunting every year. We we eat a lot of venison because of that. But yeah, he gets moose sometimes too. And a moose will feed you a lot longer than a deer because they're just massive.
I remember
Yeah.
the first time I saw one on YouTube, I couldn't believe the size of it. It was just enormous. I sort of had a vague idea that they were just slightly larger than average deer size kind of
No,
thing,
they're
but they are
massive. And
gigantic. They are
they can
just
kill, like
huge.
they can be quite lethal if you hit one with your vehicle because they have such long legs. So your vehicle like hits their legs and then their whole body just gets airborne and it comes right at your windshield. So they've been known to cause lethal accidents if you hit them while driving. Like it is, yeah, they are massive.
So let's talk about your position on vaccination, where you started, what your journey was, and how you arrived at where you are today. I want to start by asking if your parents were vaccinated.
My parents were vaccinated, but not as like with very basic vaccinations. They're from the former Yugoslavia, and they have their smallpox scars. They had DTP, so like the original like toxoid vaccines, and I think that was it. So my parents tell me stories of measles, mumps, rubella, meningitis, like so people did get these things a long time ago. The reason why it's not really talked about is because it was a part of life. Like you had to be stoic about this stuff. You couldn't just, we're so detached from disease and death. And I think it's just this like abstract idea. But like when you have to live that as part of your life, you just you learn to live with it. You that is just the way it is. And so it wasn't a big deal. Even when I asked my mom, oh yeah, we went through that. And it's my mom has hearing issues from having mumps. And my dad lost his best friend from influenza when he was a kid. So like there was a lot of loss associated with it, but it was just the way it is, and you kind of have to carry on. So, but yeah, they did have some vaccines, smallpox being one of them for sure, because both of my parents have that scar on their arm.
So your parents had an interesting situation in that they received vaccines that were available, but they also lived in a time before many other vaccines were available, and as a result, they saw the damage and in some cases experienced the damage and loss that those diseases can cause, which I have no doubt left a strong impression on them.
Yeah.
What did they do with you then? Did they fully vaccinate you as a child?
Yes. Yeah, and it's funny because I actually got to see my records recently when I started nursing school. And my mom, I was showing them to my mom, and she's like, "I don't remember. I think I just did it. Like it was just a thing. You just took your kids for their shots." Which she's like, "I don't even remember that you went that often for your shots." I'm like, "Yeah, no, you did. You took me for all of them. I had my oral polio and MMR and DTP, and so I had all of the basic ones from the 80s. So yeah, I was fully vaccinated, and it wasn't
Yeah,
really questioned when my parents were doing it anyway.
my parents were pro-vax, but I missed out on a couple of vaccines because they weren't on the official state schedule yet. So chickenpox was one, so I ended up catching chickenpox.
Yeah,
Measles was another one. I caught measles, and that wasn't a huge amount of fun either. Um, and I either caught whooping cough or mumps. I know it's one other one. I think it was whooping cough. Of course, being a pro-vax parent as I am now, I've made sure my children are fully vaccinated, and I've also gone back and I've actually had some vaccines as an adult that I didn't get as a kid. So I've actually gone into my local vaccine clinic and I've had my 2 jabs of MMR, for example.
yeah,
I mean, strictly speaking, I probably don't need that. I'll certainly be getting the shingles vaccine when I'm old enough to receive that
yeah,
because having caught, I'm I'm more vulnerable to getting shingles later in life. But I thought I may as well get the MMR anyway. because firstly, because hey, it protects against mumps, and I haven't had mumps, so it's probably a good idea to get that vaccine anyway. But secondly, also to show anti-vaxxers, I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is. I don't mind walking into my vaccine clinic and paying out of my own pocket to get the MMR vaccine, which you keep telling me is so dangerous. Fine, I'll get 2 doses of MMR vaccine. Now I'm fully vaccinated with MMR, and as expected, there were absolutely no side effects whatsoever.
Yeah.
So they can't say to me, well, you're under-vaccinated. You haven't had some of the vaccines that are available now.
Yeah.
Well, I've had all the vaccines I'm supposed to get, and I'll be having more further down the track, like shingles, for example.
Yeah.
And I even went back and got the MMR. So,
Yeah.
I'm actually.
I've only had one MMR, and they recommend 2 now. But because I'm on immune suppressants, I can't take that one. But I did go back because I missed I was a grade ahead when they started vaccinating for hepatitis B. So my little brother got Hep B vaccines in high school, but I was the grade past the time they decided to start that. So I never got Hep B vaccine. So I started my Hep B vaccines recently as well. So I've gotten 2 of those. The first one was not too bad. The second one, I kind of felt a little off for a couple of days, but then I was fine. So I have my 3rd one coming up in a month here, and then I'll be totally caught up, and I'm not concerned about it at all. And any little side effects you get are a sign that your immune system is reacting and kicking in as it's supposed to. So yeah, I'm not concerned.
One vaccine I've received that most people in the West don't get because it's not on a schedule is tuberculosis. I received the tuberculosis vaccine when I was in primary school. And the reason for that is because we had a teacher come over from Indonesia who spent some time at our school and taught Indonesian as a second language to us. And while she was there, it was determined that she was a tuberculosis carrier.
Oh
She
yeah.
was asymptomatic, but she was a carrier. So our entire school basically had to have tuberculosis shots. And I had mine then, and I was, I don't know, maybe about 11, maybe 12 years old.
Yeah.
Um, and the tuberculosis shot is very distinctive. It comes in well, back then
They like
it came in a big
poke
solid
it under
needle.
they poke it into your skin, don't they? It's like
Yeah,
a
and it leaves a
yeah,
scar, and that
yeah.
scar is quite pronounced and very visible, and you can spot it on other people if you know where to look. And that scar stayed with me for absolutely years. I don't think it faded away until about my
Mm.
20s. Maybe there's a tiny little remnant of it still today, but that was the worst side effect I got from it was a groovy
My
looking
dad's
scar.
smallpox scar is a crater on his arm. It's like like a total divot because they said you're not supposed to go swimming for a few days after. And it was a really hot day, my dad said, when he got his smallpox vaccine, and he went swimming, and he said it just crusted over, and like because he went in a lake, of course, and it just like it was awful. And he has like this crater in his arm from his smallpox vaccine because he didn't listen to them. And tuberculosis like reminded me like my mom grew up as an orphan because of tuberculosis. Her siblings and her had it when she was 4, and her mother had it, and her mother ended up dying, not because of the tuberculosis itself, but she ended up needing a blood transfusion while in hospital, and they gave her the wrong blood type, and she ended up dying from getting a transfusion of the wrong blood type. But she was quite sick when that before that happened as well with the TB. My mom remembers her older sister feeding her raw onions, because that was said to act as an expectorant and be an antibacterial while they waited to get antibiotics. So my mom was force fed raw onions for weeks at 4 years old. I don't remember much of anything at 4. That's a very strong memory for her. And her mother being very sick, that's the last thing she remembers of her own mother. And it set up her life to be very different than what it would have been had her mother lived. Her father became an alcoholic. The social services, took her away and put her in foster care, which is basically slavery, because in communist Yugoslavia, that's what foster kids were. They just gave you out to all these farms and you worked from sun up to sundown. And my mom had a very, very rough life because she lost her mom at such a young age. So, yeah.
Yeah, so tuberculosis is, again, just people forget that in the West, this was a big disease, a serious disease, a very widespread disease. And the only reason the average person doesn't think about it today is because we basically eliminated it from Western countries
Mhm.
through the vaccine. But if you go back to, say, even as late as the late 19th century, early 20th century, it was still a major threat. And you look at some of the most famous writers, for example, of the 19th century, plenty of them died from tuberculosis or moved to warmer climates to try and cope with the symptoms of their tuberculosis, and it still ended up
Yeah.
succumbing anyway. So
Yeah, my mom
this
had
was a part of everyday life
scarred
for
lung
people.
tissue, and she didn't quite understand that it was tuberculosis. She found out actually much later as an adult. She had a chest x-ray and there was scarring, like there was these white marks on her chest x-ray. She had no idea and she was scared. She was trying to figure it out, and she's talking to her sister, and her sister's like, you had TB. And then my mom's like, right, that's why you guys are doing all that stuff. And like, because she knew TB had killed her mom, but she didn't know she and her twin brother and her sibling, the rest of her siblings, had TB as well at that time. So yeah, she's actually got scar tissue on her lungs from having TB at 4 years old.
So with all that pro-vax background, you later became a parent yourself. What was your position on vaccines by the time you became a
I was
parent?
I was pretty pro-vax because I do love science, and like even though like I was one of the first people in my family to even go to college, so like I was really keen on learning all kinds of stuff. I tutored biochemistry when I was in college. Like I loved science so much, and I got flu shots every year because I have Crohn's disease as well, and so like it was recommended like you get your flu shot every year. And then when I got pregnant with my daughter, I I got a flu shot with her, and then when she was born, I don't know why I hesitated, and maybe it was just nerves or what. I just remember like, and maybe I had heard a couple of anti-vax things by then, I don't know, and then that maybe stuck with me as I was waiting to vaccinate her. But I remember just sitting there being like really nervous, like I can't undo this. What if something happens? Like it was just very scary for me. And I just remember my husband trying to like talk me down. He said, they just want to help your child, prevent these diseases, and why would they want to hurt her? Like they're not in the business to hurt babies. And I said, yeah, you're right. And I went through with it. And then she reacted a little strongly and it scared me. And I called a nurse and I said what was happening. And she said, you're a first time mom and you're just overreacting. But from what you told me, she's fine. And I just didn't feel I got the answer I was looking for. And I felt very brushed off. And I had to, as a first time mom, I had to deal with her and her reaction and her crying and her being overly tired afterwards and not wanting to nurse afterwards and just shrieking in pain. And now I know it was likely like a localized pain reaction that she was having, but I didn't get any like explanation. Just that's a very typical thing. Well, if that's typical, that's horrible. Like, I think like what if this is like this may be common, but I don't think this is normal. Like you mind just runs with it, and then you want to find an answer. And like when my daughter was born, like the internet mom forum was really taking off. There was multiple forums out there for parents. I think there's like 2 left now, if that. But like when she was born, there was many, and yeah, like the internet moms, they give you answers, and you want to prevent that from happening again, so you listen. And it's very powerful, you know, when you're afraid.
Yeah, that initial flash of fear that you get when you see something unfamiliar that seems quite alarming, and yet medical professionals are brushing it off. Oh, this is normal. No, this is not a problem. I can understand why you would think, especially if you haven't seen it before, why you would think, why are they downplaying what actually looks to me like something quite serious or
Yeah,
potentially quite serious? Um, maybe they've just seen a lot of reactions, and you know, they're so used to this, they might be dismissing something as harmless when it could actually be more severe. Or you know, are they just not really concerned, or have they overlooked something, or are they mistaking it for something else? I can understand as a parent why those fears would go through your mind as well. So what happened after that then? So what did you do? Did you slow down vaccination, or did you become
yeah,
hesitant?
yeah. I became hesitant, and I was convinced it was DTaP. Like, that was a huge thing. Like, they still blame DTaP for everything today. Like, in those circles, like DTaP is the worst thing you could ever do. And so I thought, okay, I'll skip DTaP, and I'll do. In Canada, they were doing meningococcal and Prevnar at that time, and I did those two, and she was fine. She didn't react. But then I kept like going on those forums, trying to like plan out my alternative vaccine schedule. Like, well, which ones do I need, and which one? And then you just kind of like get like, inaction almost becomes easier. Like, you're so afraid to do something that might harm your child that it's just, after a while, like, just doing nothing is easier than taking an action and then having to own the result of that action.
So what's your position on vaccines now? How has it progressed since then? And how did you progress? How did you begin to change your position on this?
I always like to think I was open-minded, and I once a year I'd kind of try to find a reason, like, okay, am I wrong about this? But of course, if you like ask your echo chamber, you get the same answer. So like, I didn't want to sit there spending all my time like researching on why I shouldn't vaccinate my daughter. So every year or so after I had kids, I would go and I'd research, but then I found like I was like asking my echo chamber what I wanted to hear, not what I needed to hear. And then when COVID started happening, I really started freaking out, not because I thought COVID, like, don't get me wrong, I don't want COVID and I'm afraid of COVID, but it wasn't necessarily that. It was like, people were going crazy. There was rationing at the grocery store. I could only buy 1 pack of beef. You know, people were buying toilet paper like crazy for some reason. And it was like, things seemed uncertain. And like, I thought a lot of people were losing their jobs, and like the economy was like on the verge of collapse at any minute. So I realized, especially in countries where this has happened, and it's happened in even my parents' country, Yugoslavia / Serbia / all the other Yugoslavian countries, they've had to reprint their money several times. Like, this is not an impossibility. It happens. And it's happened to Venezuela and a couple other countries that had like their economies completely, you know, turn upside down. They lose like sanitation, they lose healthcare, and these diseases come back. And that's what freaked me out. Like, what is going to happen if, for whatever reason, everything kind of starts to collapse on itself? And then I'm going to have 3 kids with no vaccines, and that's going to be the least of my worries in a lot of ways. But you don't know what could happen, right? So I really started like questioning my choices then. And I started by reading challenges to the tropes that I had always believed. And I decided at that point, I'm like, I'm going to vaccinate the older kids because their blood-brain barrier is formed. This was the first trigger, actually, that helped me start reading more, was I'm going to do the older kids, and then I'm going to see, like, when is the blood-brain barrier really formed so I can vaccinate my youngest. And that's when I realized, like, that was just a lie that I believed a very long time. And so I realized, like, babies are born with an intact blood-brain barrier. And it's actually very difficult to cross the blood-brain barrier. And if we knew how to do it better, like Isaac Lindenberger, he had blood-brain barrier specialist on his podcast talk about how difficult, and if we could actually do that, we could come up with ways to take, like, anti-cancer drugs to brain tumors, which we have a hard time doing because of that blood-brain barrier. And I thought, oh man, if I fell for that, like, what else did I fall for? And I started, like, being more open to being wrong. And it's uncomfortable. It's not an easy thing to, like, realize how for so many years you were wrong.
So what were the kinds of sources that you started looking at? What material did you find convincing, and why?
I watched a few talks by Paul Offit on YouTube. Paul Offit, I used to consider him the enemy in a lot of ways when I was in with the anti-vaxxers. I just thought, that horrible man, he just doesn't understand. But he's got a lot of, like, interesting things, and Vaxopedia is very good. Like, it's very concise and clear with lots of sources for the information that you can look up yourself. And so I really read that. I started talking to Taryn from the Vaccine Mom, Taryn Chapman. She's really great too. Like, she really knows her stuff. And I talked to Nicole Baldwin. I would text her sometimes, like, message her, like, hey, I'm just starting, and I know you've seen kids get vaccinated a million times, so my kids are going to be fine. You just need to tell me my kids are going to be fine. Like, I know they're going to be fine, but I just need you to tell me that this is fine. And so she would be like, yeah, you're doing this, like, good for you. Like, so it was nice to get support. But I just reached out to whoever, like, would talk to me about just starting vaccinating my kids. So I needed that peace of mind, especially when I took that first step into bringing my children to the public health center to get vaccinated.
Okay, so you've reached out to some people, and the names you've given me are familiar. I've interviewed Taryn Chapman, for example, on my podcast, and I would like to get Nicole Baldwin on as well at some point, because she's just excellent. Her material is always good.
And she's so sweet. She's just a very, very nice person. Yeah.
Vincent Iannelli runs the Vaxopedia website, and he's another one I would like to interview. But what was it about these people and what they were saying to you that made them convincing? Because you'd had plenty of reassurance from your echo chamber that what they were telling you was the right thing, and they were even telling you what you wanted to hear. But now people are telling you what you might not necessarily want to hear, or, you know, saying, yes, you do need to get your child vaccinated. Yes, this vaccine really is important, which is not necessarily what you want to hear. But what reasons or what rationale or what was it about the way they communicated with you or the material they showed you that made it more convincing than the message you were getting from your anti-vax echo chamber?
Honestly, and it sounds so dumb because I have a science background, but it was just, that's what's crazy about this. Like, I have a science background, and I chose to, like, listen to these like little anecdotes and these small like underpowered studies over like large robust ones. And I think it was just being willing to accept that maybe there isn't this huge, because like, you have to fall into this mind that everything's a conspiracy that's out to rip you off and harm you. And that is such an exhausting way to live your life, to not, and I see so many people falling for that. And it really is a personal hell to have like these people that are falling for all the conspiracy theories that are out there now. Like, it is not a happy way to live. And I'm not saying I chose this so I could be happy or like, you know, ignorance is bliss or whatever. I chose this because at some point you have to realize like people are inherently good, and hundreds and thousands of doctors are not signing up to harm your child. Like, that's not the most likely. That's not Occam's razor. That makes no sense, you know? And I just decided to just have faith in people and have faith in science and have, yes, it's a corporation, but it's also people that are, you know, wanting to help reduce infant mortality and wanting to help pull people out of poverty with science. Like, this is a just and noble cause, and there's nothing nefarious about it. And I had to really just accept that, because to be part of that crowd, you have to believe everything is this nefarious plot to harm and kill you. Like, you have to. And after a while, like, nothing is true, because it's a horrible way to live. The way that these conspiracy theorists and anti-vaxxers and stuff, it is not an easy way to navigate through life.
When you say that the conspiracy mindset is exhausting, I can understand why you say that, because the problem with conspiracy theories is that they have to keep growing larger to accommodate any new information or
Mm-hmm.
any arguments, any counter argument that would seem to undermine the claims being made, so that the more and more scaffolding has to be built on
Yeah.
top of the conspiracy theory to explain away alternative evidence or explanations. And then the conspiracy theory itself becomes multifaceted. Different conspiracy theories have to be grafted in wherever they will
Mm-hmm.
fit, and sometimes
Yeah.
where they don't.
It's
And the
exhausting.
whole thing gets increasingly complicated and messy and more difficult to sustain, because it it begins to really drag uh, on the credibility of its adherents.
And I didn't really think anti-vax was conspiracy until they started making bedfellows with other conspiracies. So, like, the anti-vaxxers are now friends with the flat earthers, and they're now friends with the moon landing deniers, and they're friends, like, and then that's another thing that made me take like a step back. Like, I'm sure we landed on the moon. I'm sure the earth is round. Like, I don't subscribe to these ideas. So then I really had to ask myself, like, I could be wrong about this. I think I could be wrong. And it's not easy to say, like, I've been wrong for 12 years. I guess it's better than being wrong for 13 years, but, you know, it's not an easy thing to go through.
I want to touch on the issue of autoimmune diseases, because that is another big concern that many parents have. They might say, my child has an autoimmune disease, and I'm concerned that this means he can't have a vaccine. Or my child doesn't have an autoimmune disease, and I'm concerned that the vaccine will give him one. Now,
Yeah,
I have two autoimmune diseases. I have ankylosing spondylitis, which is a form of arthritis,
yeah,
and I have ulcerative colitis, which,
yeah,
as a Crohn's disease sufferer, you'll know as a form of inflammatory bowel disease.
yeah.
Neither of these conditions invalidate me for vaccination. They have
Yeah.
no relevance to vaccination in any way at all. Whether
Yeah. How did you get your
you
MMR shot? Were you not on any meds at the time?
I was not taking I was not taking my anti-inflammatories at the time.
Okay.
I've been in remission for some time.
Okay.
My ulcerative colitis has been in remission, so I haven't been taking anti-inflammatories for that. So I was able to,
Oh, lucky.
go ahead without any drama. Yeah. Um, but even I've got two autoimmune conditions, and even I would do my best to make sure that I was vaccinated to the max. And yes, there are certain autoimmune conditions that people have, or immunodeficiency problems that people have, which do make them more vulnerable and therefore ineligible to receive some activated vaccines or
Yeah.
some active vaccine. But these risks are extremely well documented, and your doctor will go through them with you and confirm which
Yeah.
vaccines are recommended for you and which aren't. So it's not a case of, oh, they accidentally gave me the wrong one, or they
Yeah.
just keep throwing vaccines at me and now they've realized they
Or they
shouldn't have
want
given
to
me
give
that.
you every single
Nothing like that
vaccine.
happened.
And like even when
Yeah.
I vaccinated my kids, they didn't get every single vaccine they missed. They got the amount of vaccines that they needed to catch up for their age group. So it's not even a matter of, well, now I'm vaccinating my kids, so they're going to get every single jab that they missed and since that they were born, and that's not what happened at all. So
That's it.
and so
Plus,
you
of
would see
course,
these things like they just want to vaccinate you with everything. Well, no, that's not true. They actually have a system to determine which vaccines you're eligible for at any given time. It's if it were about giving you all of them, then they would just give you all of them regardless. So it's almost like there's research behind it.
yeah, anti-vaxxers love to tell the story of, I I was vaccine hesitant, and then I finally broke, and I took my child to get caught up, and they gave him 15 vaccines in one day, and now
Yeah.
now he's never been the same since. Well, that's obviously a lie. They're not going to give him 15 vaccines in one
No.
day, because the
No.
multiple doses have to be spaced out anyway.
Yeah.
And certainly there's no schedule that would say the child catching up gets 50 on one day. That's just
The
completely unreal.
most one of my children got in a day was my oldest. She got 4 in a day. And she didn't have to. Like the nurse was nice. She's like, listen, you can do 2 now or do 2 like 2 in a couple weeks. You don't have to get 4 shots now. But I just looked at my dad, I'm like, can we just do the 4 shots? And because then we don't have to come back. You're done until grade 9, because she's in grade 7 now. So you're done till your friends and you are getting vaccinated for grade 9. She's like, all right, but I get another, she likes those bubble teas. She's like, I get one more bubble tea then. And I was like, okay, deal. And so she got 4 shots in one visit. She had sore arms, but she didn't get a fever. She didn't get any kind of like sore joints or muscles or any kind of achiness or nothing. She was fine. And that was 4, but she got hepatitis B, she got HPV, she got MMRV, and she got a DTaP with polio all in one day. And she was totally fine.
So, what advice would you give to a vaccine hesitant parent who is wavering on the fence about
Yeah.
this issue, and says, "Oh, but one side seems very convincing, and then the other side seems very convincing." And I hear all these stories from parents. There's so many anecdotes out there, and how can you doubt a parent's experience? And then on the other side, there's these scientists, but science changes, and what if they're wrong this time? And 5 years or 10 years or 15 or 20 years down the track, we find out that they were wrong,
Yeah.
and now it's all changed. What
It's,
what advice would you give someone who's on the fence and doesn't know which side to commit to, because the amount of information coming out seems overwhelming, and it appears that both sides have a strong case?
I would, I found comfort, and not everyone's going to have the time to do this, but I've surrounded myself with people that are almost like experts in the field and look at who is telling you this information. If it is a chiropractor, maybe they don't know what goes in a vaccine, how they're made, what they do to the body. I doubt it. If it's, you know, a pediatrician that is no longer, you know, is kind of an outcast and there's no other pediatrician that really recommends them anymore, maybe don't buy their book, because that's how they're making their money now, because they probably can't practice anymore, you know? Like, there's definitely signs you can look for in the people that are giving you this information. And there's also a dismantling of every single anti-vaccine argument out there. And there's so much evidence that supports vaccines and so much evidence that proves those tropes completely wrong, completely false. I can't tell you how many that I used to believe, only to find like the saline placebo thing. There's saline placebos, you know, like there's so many of these tropes that are so false. And when presented, the real anti-vaxxers, when presented with that evidence, like, you can't sue manufacturers, I say, no, that's not true. Here's the evidence, like, you can. Oh, no, that's not true. Like, even with the evidence, these people will still continue to say the same things over and over again. And that's a huge red flag. Like, if you're shown information like that is robust, large studies, maybe the people that go against that are wrong, you know?
That's very sound advice. But the key tactic that anti-vaxxers like to use is less scientific and more emotional.
Yes.
For example, they love their powerful anecdotes and their stories, and they will say, well,
and even look into the famous
this,
ones, because there are some famous anecdotes out there, and when you look into them, that's not what happened. Like, I'm not even gonna say
no, well,
her.
that's the
I'm not
point
even gonna say her
coming
name
to.
because I don't want her coming after me. But like, one of them is, you know who I'm talking about, and that's not what happened. You know that's not what happened, and I know that's not what happened. But she's managed to convince a large group of parents to terrify them out of vaccinating their child for fear that their child may die, you know? So look a little closer at what these people are saying. Like, is what they're saying true? Because if you look a little deeper, it's not. And
See, that
I don't
brings me
know.
to my next point, which is what they will say is, if you doubt this anecdote or this story or
Mm-hmm.
claim that this mother is making, you're essentially claiming or accusing her of lying. And why would a parent lie about something so terrible that had happened to their child? What do they gain from it? What's in it for them? And how dare you tell this person that their experience is
Yeah,
wrong? They had the
it's
experience, not
hard
you.
because I can empathize with that, because I know what this parent wants. They want a reason. And I wanted that reason too. And I get that. And I was convinced. My daughter had cryencephalitis because of the information that I was given from these groups. So I get that. And I would claim like something bad happened to my daughter. And I know like her brain was probably swollen. Like, I would have sworn that was the truth, you know? And so I can get why they think they're telling the truth. But the evidence doesn't show that. And it doesn't make what happened to their child not important, or their child's current condition not important. Like, I'm not disparaging any parent that has an autistic child. Like, I have an autistic child too. It is important, to acknowledge the struggle that is involved with that. What I won't acknowledge is that vaccines caused somebody's autism. So those are two different things. I can totally empathize with a parent and their struggles. I cannot support their reasoning behind it if it has to do with something that there's no evidence for.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. And really it cuts to the core of the issue, which is, when faced with a challenge, a highly emotional one, like, are you accusing this mother of lying, or do you think a mother would lie about their experience with their child? The simple answer is yes, and it's demonstrably true. Some parents do lie about their children. They lie about the experiences that their children are supposed to have had. They sometimes lie about medical conditions their child does have or doesn't
Yeah.
have. Munchausen's by proxy,
Oh,
for example, is very well documented. So
yes.
there are plenty of people out there lying about their children's conditions.
Or just
And
misled about their children's conditions. Like,
at the same time, there are many people who are
yeah,
honestly
lying.
badly informed or have been led astray or been convinced by other people that this is the case.
Yeah.
So they have been led to interpret their experience through a set of goggles with a predetermined worldview, and then they've adopted that worldview for whatever reason. Some parents do it out of a need to find a reason beyond themselves, as because they feel guilty and there's a desperate need to obviate their guilt, so they need another reason for their child's condition that doesn't involve them. And
Yeah.
we've certainly seen that in a few cases, and particularly in the one that you've alluded to.
Yeah.
So yes, the simple answer to this challenge is, well, yeah, they could be lying. I mean, I don't necessarily know for sure. It depends on the situation, and it depends on the information available to us. But absolutely, parents can and
Oh,
do
yeah.
lie about their children. And sometimes they will do it for attention, for money, or whatever, or because there's some kind of psychological issue at play,
Yeah.
and sometimes because they are mistaken. But the bottom line is, yes, some parents will be deceptive about their children and their experiences,
Yeah.
and some parents have been honestly misled by
Yeah.
others, and that's
But
not
this is
on them.
why we have to rely on the science, because you
Yep.
cannot use an anecdote as a reason to not vaccinate your children, because you don't know. All you know is the science and the data and the large studies. Like, that's what, the larger the study, the better, because then the noise kind of gets filtered out and you can trust the result more. Like the whole Wakefield thing with 12 kids, like, which is proven to be wrong. Like, he's a joke anyway, but besides the fact, like, let's say they didn't retract the study. It's 12 kids. You cannot come to a conclusion of any kind with 12 kids. Like, it's impossible. All those little studies do is say, hey, there's something we could maybe look at here in a bigger picture to see if this actually means anything. You cannot use any small study to determine the truth about anything. So, yeah.
That's it. The beauty of the science is that it is objective. It doesn't have an agenda to push,
Yeah.
and it will lay out the evidence and scrutinize it from every angle, and then arrive at a conclusion that is based on that evidence, and a conclusion that is verifiable, demonstrable, repeatable. And that is the beauty of the scientific method. That's how it allows us to arrive at concrete conclusions that have no room for doubt.
And the thing about,
So what
oh, sorry, go on.
yeah. So what advice would you give to a pro-vax person who is approaching vaccine hesitant or an anti-vax
So
person
anti-vax
with
is
the aim
different. Like, it's hard to convince a very anti-vax person, but a hesitant person, like, I would say, like, okay, I want to hear your concern. Like, what did you hear that makes you second guess vaccination? Because you can dismantle it, but you have to let them, you can't just be like, you're wrong and, whatever. Like, let's see what you're concerned with. Like, bring me the evidence that you think you have for your concerns. Let's go through it together. That's what I think would be the best way to deal with someone that's, like, on the fence or hesitant or doesn't know how to interpret what they're hearing. Because a lot of people are naturally pro-vaccine, but they don't know why. So their inclination is to vaccinate their child, but they don't know enough science behind what vaccines are, how they work, or the studies or whatever. So then they're more likely to hear an anti-vax argument and go, well, that sounds horrible. That sounds like it could be true or whatever. So I think the best way is to educate people in general, even if they aren't hesitant. Just educate everybody about vaccines, because that's the best way to fight the misinformation. But in general, like dealing with a hesitant person, you have to just be patient and let them bring their concern to you and provide the evidence, and even explain how this evidence compared to this evidence is more reliable, more robust, or whatever, because it's hard for people to navigate that at times too.
Yeah, that's certainly the case. People need help to interpret evidence, especially if it's evidence or information of a sort that they're not familiar with, or that requires mental and intellectual tools that they may not have acquired themselves, or mental skills and analytical competencies that they haven't actually acquired yet. And that, of course, is where the experts come in, or at least the well-advised amateurs who can come in and sort of break it down in layman's terms and say, well, I'm not a scientist, but I understand this pretty well from what I've read, and I can explain this to you in everyday language. And that's very relatable. That's where
and here's some scientists that know what they're talking about. Like, here's their books. Here's what they've like. I'm not gonna sit there and say I'm an expert. Like, I'll gladly say to people, like, I don't know what you're talking about. You have to be willing, and I will say that now. I'm actually really good at saying I don't know, because of what I got myself into by pretending to know everything. But yeah, like, there are people that have dedicated their lives to like studying this stuff. So, have some faith in them, because I didn't spend my whole life, trying to design a new vaccine or whatever, but I'm watching and listening to people who do. So that's probably a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I think this idea of parents reaching out to each other on a peer-to-peer basis is very effective, and the anti-vaxxers know that. That's the tactic that they use. But from the pro-vax perspective, I think it's important because it shows that you don't need to be an expert to understand the essentials of the science of vaccines and the reasons why they work, and that people are not being asked to simply, check their brains at the door and just trust the scientists blindly, or trust the experts blindly. There are aspects of this that can be readily understood by the average person, and that can be communicated by the average person to another average person, and that means that it's more accessible.
And I know so many people on Twitter even that are epidemiologists, and you can, find their information other places online, that they're legitimate. You can ask them anything and they're happy to answer you. Like, you can ask them to, I don't know if I should share her name, but she's happy to share the autism studies that prove like there's no causation in regards to autism. She'll share those with anybody. She's got them like on the go, like, here, this is why vaccines don't cause autism. So they're more than happy to share their information with you. If you ask them, they're happy to share it. And that's the other thing with the anti-vax group that I've kind of come to realize, because a lot of things happened at the same time for me when I was going through this. I also realized my son was autistic, and I didn't know that. I didn't want to understand that at the time. I thought autism was something horrible, and that is a sentiment that is in the anti-vax community, heavily. They're always trying to cure their autistic children with diet and supplement and detox and whatever else. And lately I've found out they're moved on to bleach, which is horrible. But I had this horrible picture of autism painted for me. And so when my own son was autistic and unvaccinated till he was 5, so, he had a regression even that I just thought, oh, he has a new baby brother now, so that's probably why, or whatever. So I missed it because of my preconceived ideas of what autism was. And so in this journey, I've also realized, like, I had to admit that I was wrong about my son as well. So that was really hard for me. And they don't do any justice to the autistic community at all.
No, there's definitely a very strong ableist tendency in the anti-vax group, and that comes through quite aggressively at times. And
Yeah.
it's very disappointing to see, because it's it actually dehumanizes children. In very many cases, they're dehumanizing their own children, and it seems to be more driven by emotion than a desire to understand what is going on and
There's
to
almost a
actually deal with it.
resentment there. Like, if I wouldn't have damaged you, you would be okay. Like, there's almost like this underlying resentment with how, and regret and what, like, I don't feel any of that with my son. I'm almost glad it came out this way, because I don't know if I would have vaccinated him at that same time and then he became autistic just by happenstance. I don't know if I would have felt the same as I do now. And I'm kind of glad I figured it out kind of simultaneously. It's not a what if I like to play with too much, but I'm happy the way things turned out, and I'm grateful that I came to these realizations, because my family's gotten nothing but benefit from it. Like, everyone's doing so much better.
Well, Lydia, this has been a really terrific and informative interview. So thank you very much for sharing your time with me today. Is there any final message that you would like to leave with our audience based on your experiences as someone who was basically pro-vax, then became vaccine hesitant, and then turned strongly pro-vax again?
You know, the biggest thing to cure me of the conspiracies around vaccines and around anything really is the amount of times I've been accused myself of being in the conspiracy. Like, nothing will cure you faster when people call you. I've been called so many different things. And this is what, honestly, I'll never fall for that kind of thinking again, because I know I'm not part of a conspiracy, and the different kinds of conspiracies that I've been accused of being in. So, like, if anything to take away, just know conspiracies are crap, and there's nothing that makes sense about them whatsoever. And being on the end of being accused of one just really seals it in for me that whole line of thinking is just inaccurate, wrong, and crazy and silly.
Those are certainly words to live by. Thank you very much again, Lydia. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.